Good morning. Please rise for the singing of our national anthem. Choir members, you may join the ensemble. Gentlemen, please remove your hats. You may be seated. Mr. Rauschenberger, esteemed trustees, Mr. Hanford, Ms. Khanna, faculty, parents, guests, friends, and most importantly, members of the class of 2017. Good morning and welcome to the 161st commencement exercises of Elgin Academy. I am honored to have the privilege of beginning our ceremony this morning, a special day for all involved, but especially for the 38 graduates seated to my right. My responsibility is to welcome all of you assembled here today to our beautiful campus, and I do this as a representative of the tremendous group of educators seated behind me. I also wish to acknowledge and thank Gannon Catoni, EA Class of 2015, for his efforts to provide us some unique aerial footage of today's ceremony via his drone-mounted camera. Class of 2017. I take very seriously the responsibility of being one of the last members of the Elgin Academy community who gets to speak to you as a whole. Each year, I ruminate on what words of wisdom I can share that will somehow stick in your mind on a day that is full of so much celebration that it is likely you will not remember much of what I say, and that is okay. Going back several weeks, I first thought of finding and expanding on a good quote from Going to Cacciato, a book that I first enjoyed reading when I visited Mr. Sanchez's English 4 class last year, and I know that you recently read and enjoyed as well. Then I heard Macy Feely's eloquent use of this idea in her salutatorian speech at baccalaureate and realized that she had already done it much better than I could have. I alternately thought of drawing upon your senior speeches, which are the best speeches given on campus each year by anyone, faculty or students, and perhaps using a single quote from each of them to weave together some thoughts. Then I heard Mr. Hilsebeck perform this idea as a poem at baccalaureate and realized that he had already done it much better than I could have. Then I thought about hearkening back to a year in the past and discussing how much had changed in what seems to some of us as a short period of time to highlight the idea that much of what you will encounter in the future defies prediction. Then I heard Mr. Hanford talk about the year 2005, the year you entered first grade at baccalaureate, and realized that he had already done it much better than I could have. About this time, I decided that perhaps I ought to write my speech for the class of 2018 earlier next year and formally publish it so that anyone who used my ideas prior to my commencement speech would have to get my express written consent. Continuing on, I Googled advice for graduating high school seniors, and I realized that within an instant, I could glean ideas from such varied sources as Time Magazine, The Washington Post, Teen Vogue, and 97.9 Kick FM, a station that supposedly plays the best country music in Quincy, Illinois. And all of those ideas were presented to me just within the first 10 Google responses. I began to realize that if you're searching for some advice on what you should do now in your life, or what choices you should make as you head off to college, you are probably not going to be searching too long. It is quite likely that by now, you have heard many opinions, both those you sought and those that were presented to you without request. I encourage you to listen to those that know you best: parents, teachers, mentors, peers, as well as people who have been in your position, such as Ms. Kana, because they likely are providing that advice with some sort of context with who you are and where you need the most growth and encouragement. As an illustration of that thought, I've decided to say a few words about a teacher's advice that I received from my favorite high school teacher. Mr. Harold Vaughn was, not surprisingly, my pre-calculus and calculus teacher at Lindbergh High School in St. Louis over 25 years ago. For those doing the math, yes, that means that many of the educators seated behind me could have been my high school teacher. He was... He was, and still is, a man who loved mathematics, loved engaging in witty banter with students, and who meant business in class when the lights went off and the overhead projector went on prior to his lectures. Students who did not catch on to that silent cue likely had to dodge a chalkboard eraser thrown their way. That's not something that's pedagogically approved today. He quite likely is one of the main reasons that I became an educator. As many of you have experienced, those math classes can be challenging, even for a future math teacher. So whenever I would approach him with a question, his first response, after I provided my lengthy explanation, was, "Use what you know." He would then go about working or helping another student. Now you can imagine the first several times I heard this, I was left frustrated, wishing that he had just answered my question so that I can move on to the next problem. However, just as Daniel LaRusso learns in The Karate Kid that when Mr. Miyagi tells him to wax his cars or paint his fence, there is a method to his madness, I learned that by saying very little, Mr. Vaughn was actually telling me a lot. Use what you know. He was telling me first and foremost that he had the confidence in my abilities to answer my own question. He was telling me that sometimes the tougher problems in mathematics and in life require more than just a cursory process followed by a premature cry for help. He was telling me to recognize that patience is a virtue, that recalling the method to solving past problems was a key to solving future problems, and that I should bet on myself to be right if I put just a little more effort into the situation. Now, I cannot confirm whether use what you know was a personal philosophy of his, a mantra he used with many students, or just a line he threw out there with me that seemed to stick. What I can confirm is that once those words left his mouth, they became mine to hold on to and use for the rest of my life. Now, I'll admit that I don't draw upon them too often. I assure you there is no use what you know tattoo hidden under this graduation gown. But they do seem to pop into my head at seemingly appropriate times, such as when solving math problems with students, tackling a tough situation, or when trying to overcome writer's block on a commencement welcome. Use what you know. What I know is that those words mean a lot to me, and they came from a person who played the same role in my life that I imagine multiple teachers seated behind me played in yours. So rather than attempt to provide you with one more piece of advice that I hope holistically applies to all 38 of you, I actually am going to ask you to close your eyes for a moment. Now, I want you to think of one statement that one of the teachers behind me has said to you during the course of your Elgin Academy experience, Doesn't necessarily need to be a compliment, but it's something that's going to stick with you and is going to challenge you and has challenged you. I imagine that everyone in the audience has one of these as well. It sticks with you through this day. You plan to pack it away and take it with you to college and draw upon its wisdom and strength for the rest of your life. Whatever statement and teacher each of you is thinking right now, that is the best advice I can present to you during this speech. One of the final lessons that I have the privilege of passing along to you in your final minutes as an Elgin Academy student. Class of 2017 students and parents, thank you for sharing this stage of your life with us. Congratulations on reaching this moment. I am honored to help award your diplomas today. Thank you.